Welcome everyone to this. I'm so excited to do this with Blayne for many reasons. Many reasons because one is I feel like immigration is so complex and people tend to simplify it a lot. Like people simplify it a lot. And so that's why for me, this is important for me, for my friends, for everyone who's listening on this. Like I'm literally doing something I wish I had when I was planning to move to Canada. But I'll let Blayne introduce himself and talk more about, why this partnership and why you need to listen to this every single time it goes live.
Yeah, Dozy, well, thank you for having me, and for all the listeners, it's a pleasure to connect with you. So, the reason why it's important to stay on top of immigration, because it is incredibly fast changing. It's the fastest changing area of law. It feels like it changes like every day, at least a couple times a week, somewhere in immigration there's a change. And it's really important to stay on top of it, especially for those who are looking to come to Canada or those who are already in, waiting to get permanent residence or even getting citizenship or families. It's just there, it's changing, and there's a whole bunch of changes that occur, from policy to public opinions to politics to to the specific job requirements or the labor market needs, or countries and geopolitics. Like it's just forever changing. So the reason you got to listen to our live chats is to kind of stay up to speed on it and know. And of course, I give you a background. I'm the founder of Bright Immigration, and I'm also building, and we've launched some great technology to help with transparency and helping people understand their options much easier. And we'll share more about that later. But yes, long story short is take it seriously. And remember, immigration doesn't care about you. You need to care about immigration. So be on top of it.
Yeah, I like that. Like, yeah, it doesn't care about you. It's like, it's soulless. Like, you just have to care about it.
It's soulless. You don't know it's crazy. I was at a citizen ceremony in person, and it's a Institute of Citizenship Canada, ICC, I believe. Um, uh, I might get the acronym wrong. Hope they don't get mad at me. I'm gonna refer them anyways, ICC. And we went to the ceremony, and they do a beautiful job of a ceremony, a citizenship ceremony, and it's great. And they speak to people at round tables. Like I really, really appreciate what they do. And the government is trying to do more Zoom ceremonies, citizens. And then you realize, I'm having a conversation with a judge there and some folks there, and it dawned on me that the entire immigration process has no human, like no connection. The immigration officer you're speaking, like the only connection maybe is at the airport with the CBSA, right?
Gosh.
But otherwise you're not, you don't even know a name of the person you're speaking to. There's no emails. So it's very, 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 and now they want to get citizenship online. And I think that's insanity, because at what point we're creating a country where we have neighbors? It's all about human. Like this is what
Yeah,
we're in the business of. This is what
yeah.
immigration is. And to think that we're so disconnected. So to your point of what you're saying, like you don't know, and it is obviously there's a really important job to it, but there is a lot of things that there's no faces involved in the process. So like I said, immigration doesn't really care much about you. You have to care about it,
Yeah.
right?
But
So yeah.
let's not get too sad, because like that thing you just said now is a really interesting thing to think about. Like
Don't
I
worry,
don't
I'll
see
get
any
positive.
human being, but down to the updates. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the PEI thing. Um, so literally PEI excluded from draws for
Right.
PMPs. Like, what does that mean? Why is this important? Why should people take this seriously?
Well, with the PI situation and everything that's going on with that situation there, it's a really good it's a really good story to pay attention to. And what's happened there is PI is a very small province, right? Prince Edward Island, and I would probably say it's probably the smallest in population size, or definitely one of the smallest. And in immigration, one of the very common questions I get is, should I move to another place? Should I relocate to another province, or should I, to increase my PR chances? And PI is a perfect example of why you have to be very careful of that strategy. So tens of thousands of people move to PI thinking that they'll get permanent residency in a faster, more seamless pathway. And PI, because it is economically driven immigration programs, say, hey, we don't need folks who do these types of jobs to qualify anymore. So we're going to get rid of those jobs, right? A lot of them are hospitality, food, and now folks who literally packed up, relocated, spent time there working and getting qualified and doing all of that, and now it's changed and the doors have been closed on them. And PI right now, there's folks who are protesting and a hunger strike and trying to fight, trying to change that. And it seems that PI is not really changing on that statement. So it's really, really important to be mindful before you make these decisions. And where are you in that cycle? Like, are you the early mover of this idea, or are you the late mover of the idea? Are you, and that's what happens. Like, there's definitely people who went through the program and found some success, but then the numbers keep growing and growing. At some point, you're like, no, we don't. It's enough. We don't need it. Like, it's too much. It's the point of this program is to help our province in certain areas, and we're good. We're met now. So, and that's very likely something that could happen, and I expect to happen in other places too. It's going to keep going.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to what you said earlier about immigration being soulless. What we talk about immigration being soulless. Like every single decision is very factual. And, you know, like I'm not saying I'm not trying, because I know this is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people and people might misunderstand what I'm about to say. But for the immigrant themselves, we're emotional about it. You want to get the PR or you want to get X, but we tend to forget that whoever is making that call is either very economically driven or something, like there are numbers to hit and all that. And once you hit those numbers or once those things work, it just changes the policy changes. And so we get like, oh, why is this happening to me? Because for us, is you moved your whole life, you get
Yeah.
sad about it, and it's mad because why I find this interesting, because I know that like I've seen someone mention somewhere, hey, move to PEI, the school is cheap, accommodation is cheap, all those kind of things. Like just move. And so people are just moving to PEI, but the policy is not doesn't match with what people think. So it's
Yeah, absolutely. And there's and I think there's a big I'm going to sound a little negative in some cases here, but I promise there's a lot of positivity we'll get to. But, you know, um, in the topic of PI, you know, there is, in my experience of immigration for over, almost 14 years and being in the ins and outs of it, I've come to recognize, and I think a lot of experts in immigration recognize that there is a level of deception, or there's a level of disoriented, disorganized environments in immigration, and that's everywhere, right? That's from the agent who's interested in making money overseas and just is pumping as many people as possible, or they
yeah.
want to charge you money when you really don't have a chance, down to the schools that are taking as many students as they can because they're making money, but not realizing that it's not communicating to the PI goals. And and of course, they're like, well, you're a student, you're supposed to just be here to study. But we know very well what the program is, and we know that a huge chunk of folks coming are going to get PRs, and that's why they're doing it, right? So there is a level of I don't want to go as far to say dishonesty or deception necessarily, but in some cases there is, absolutely there is, and in some cases it's just really disorganized, and you're really putting a lot of trust in them to protect you, and they're not going to protect you. So that's important to know. So they're not going to protect you. They're not going to look after you. You have to kind of be ahead of that curve, right?
Mm.
But again, on the bright side of that point, there is a ton of people that are getting PRs, that they're going through the programs, that things are working out for them. Absolutely. I still think it's actually a minority a group that's having this. Mind you, there's over 1 million people that we'll have to see how it plays out. But there's a lot of movement still. Immigration in Canada is still amazing. It's still probably the most. It still is very much the most progressive in the world. It's still pro-immigration environment. No one is saying to get rid of it, and it's also astronomically high numbers. Right, we're almost doubled our normal numbers. Right, so it's normal. So for those who are nervous and scared, don't be. Take time. The universe will do its thing and guide you through. But just be active, be proactive with what you're doing.
Yeah. Folks, you have to do like I think the biggest lesson there, aside from what you say, is, and in general for anything you're doing, is you need to take care of yourself. Like really need to be clear about what you want to do and what's happening. It's not immigration is not something you just say yeah, I'm just gonna just coast through it. You can't coast through it. Like you absolutely can't coast through it. Moving on to the next one, which is the flagpoling one. And like I said, mentioned this to you earlier on. Like, this is the first time I'm hearing about flagpoling. Like, I didn't know that existed. I didn't even know what that was. I was like, wait, what is flagpoling? And why are people flagpoling? But yeah, let's talk a bit about that. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean?
So
And for people who are thinking of it, like, why should they be careful when they're thinking about flagpoling?
yeah, and flagpolling, huh? So flagpolling is keep in mind that immigration experts and people, it's like chefs or cooks or anything, right? There's different strategies, ideas, ways to do things, and different opinions and experiences, right? Now, I'm fairly involved in the immigration space. I follow a lot of thought leaders in the space and try to keep on top of things. And when it comes to the flagpolling, that idea. A lot of folks don't recommend people to go do flagpoling for postgraduate work permits. I agree. There's no need to do that. Once you submit your application online, you can start working. You have all the perks and benefits of getting, I shouldn't say all, but pretty much almost all the perks of having an actual work permit, right? You can work legally full time and it goes towards your permanent residency, right? So, and also in some cases, there's actually strategic reasons why you should do an online application because sometimes, you might get a little bit more time sometimes, right? So just keep that in mind. And immigration does make mistakes that often could benefit you sometimes. So that's the thing. Flight polling, what it is, to just give people some context, maybe I'm a little ahead of myself, is someone who essentially in Canada go down to the border, the U.S. border. Typically, they're refused entry because a lot of times they don't have U.S. visas to enter, so they'll go get refused and then circle back in. Typically, that's how flight polling works, and then you apply for the work permit at the port of entry at the border. So postgraduate work permits were folks doing it, going through that process. The reasons we don't like flagpoling, or I personally don't, and other experts don't, is because one is if you have to go to US and you do get the refusal at the port of entry from the US, that's a refusal now. So when you fill out a
Mhm.
visa, have you been refused entry into a country? You have to answer yes. So that's something to consider. The U.S. does have a program. I'm forgetting it, but there is a way. In some cases, you could avoid that, but still, it's still an issue, right? You got to go wait in line. Got to do that. It's a whole day thing, right? For what benefit? I'm not entirely sure of the benefit of doing that. So, so that's one. Second, you're talking to an officer. I'm telling you, as someone who's waited in lines with clients in CBSA at the airport, I've heard everything. It's a toss up. You could get a wonderful, kind-hearted, reasonable officer, and you could have an absolute nightmare of an officer who then starts grilling you, goes through things like you have no idea how that's going to go. So that's some of the reasons why we don't recommend. And also, it's just unnecessary from our perspective, right? There's really no real reason for you to do it. When you do that, usually you have a study permit that's valid still. You should still have a sticker, and your passport allows you to enter into Canada still. So, waiting 1 or 2 months for the actual work permit to be issued, you know, there's not much there. So the risk factor is just there. The reason CBSA has actually stopped it, in my opinion, or just kind of what we've kind of recognized, is the fact that the first thing is CBSA, um, you know, is they were conversations of another strike. So there's definitely a need to bring down the amount of work that's involved there. There's no need for it. So that's definitely one area of efficiency that they could look to do. Get rid of the policy and also leave it to IRCC to make those decisions as well, right? And
Mhm.
also another factor that could also play a big role is because of the changes with immigration now with postgraduate work permits, there's some seismic changes in there. They may want to streamline that instead of having to train CBSA and all these rules and all these changes now. They could just have a IRCC, which is really powered by technology.
Yeah.
It's been for a while, and it's more so now. So there's a whole bunch of process efficiencies that I could see as the reason why they would want to do that, and it makes sense to me.
Yeah. There's something you say that I find interesting. And I don't know if it's this thing. It just feels like with immigration, it feels like the media says one thing, and people just take a quick bit of the thing that's happening, and no one talks about it, every single thing that goes underneath. Because I do not have heard someone talk about applying for PGWP, a student, and I'm not sure they knew that once you apply for it, you get some of the benefits of getting of a work permit. I feel like some people think that you apply for it and then you have to wait for for your work permit to come back before you do anything. Like I feel like that's how I saw it too, because you just mentioned that once you apply for it, you actually do get some benefits. Like you can literally start applying for a job and all that. I'm not sure people know that actually, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure if that's the case too, if they know that or not. But once you've submitted a PGWP application, and assuming you have your letter of graduation, the major ingredients, yeah, you can legally work. It goes towards your PR, full time, all of those good things. So. And also, like, keep in mind that, is IRCC does make mistakes sometimes, so sometimes you could even buy yourself some more time. Sometimes they may issue the issue date and the 3 years or 1 year period from a different time versus you just going to port of entry and then that date is
Yeah.
today. So and keep in mind, immigration does make mistakes, especially because we see a large amount of files. We see the mistakes that happen, and they do happen, and sometimes sometimes they work in your favor, sometimes they don't work in your favor. But when they don't work in your favor, you could just fight it, or you could just reapply
Yeah.
or do what you need to do to correct it, right? So yeah, so there's a lot of good reasons to, in this case, to avoid flag polling. We use flag polling, where I use flag poll. I don't, sorry, port of entries is when someone is a exempt. They're exempt from a visa. They don't need a visa to enter. So European certain countries, South Korea, etc. They come into the port of entry at the border, usually flying in, and then they present an application at the border and they get a work permit right there, right?
Um,
That's when we use a port of entry strategy. Flagpole is similar because you're kind of getting refused into US and coming to the border again, right? And land crossings are historically very tough to deal with. So, many folks, Canadian folks, for example, would say that I never had my bag searched at customs flying, but when I go down to visit New York or go anywhere and I come back up, I've had my stuff searched, right?
hmm,
So, it's just different environments as well.
that's interesting. I
Yeah.
just feel like, gosh, like, just talking to you, like, I mean, yeah, this is like,
Yeah. It's nice to share it too, it's a lot.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
there's a ton of stuff. Like, I feel like there's a ton of stuff in there, not spoken, like it's unspoken. It's just there, and then you either just come across it as a punch in the face or as a hug. I think it just depends on what's happened to you at that point in time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, immigration changes really fast. There's always movements. We're dealing with people I made a joke and it's very true, but I'm wearing a hat not because I'm balding. It's because I deal with alopecia because of the stress of immigration and dealing in this line of work. So, when you care about people and they have trust in you and you got to deliver, you got to do it. But then you're relying on the government to do the things that you need to do, and the amount of policy changes they make, and they don't think things through. And then we have clients who are like, hey, what's this question, what's the answer? I'm like, we don't know the answer because no one knows the answer, because not even immigration knows the answer yet. It's only when we start doing it and then we start asking the
Asking
questions, then
questions.
they start answering, and that's months after, right? So that's what type of environment we're in. It's very tough. My heart goes out to the immigration experts out there, the consultants and lawyers who really try to help their clients. It's a very, 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 very tough job.
Mm, okay. So the last change we talked about in the article, which is basically LMIA, it seems a lot of things have changed with that. Like, we talked about the validity period has gone from 12 to 6 months. Process has been streamlined based on employer needs. And then people also need to now demonstrate efforts to include asylum seekers with valid work permits in Canada. Just kind of
Mhm.
talking a bit about what all those changes are and what this means for people who are looking to get LMIAs in Canada now.
hmm So, when it comes to LMIs right now, it's again, this is another area of immigration. It's ESDC. It's not really to IRCC or CBSA. This is a different department. They're dealing with employment, labor market factors. So it's just another aspect of immigration that has to be considered. And lately, it's been way more impactful because the points for immigration for express entry has gone higher, which the only way to really make a jump, I shouldn't say the only way, but one of the most common ways of making a jump is to get an LMIA done. So it's becoming a very, really big hot topic for us, and it's always been more so than lately. And so the changes, there's several changes. So, the first thing is when you get an LMI approved, there is an expiration date that the work permit has to be submitted before that expiration date. So it went from 12 months to 6 months. And I believe in some cases it's 12 months to 6 months. And 6 months was the norm. And that's kind of how it was before, right? So keep in mind, folks, that when you're learning about policies, be mindful if they're COVID related policies, right? A lot of times you're like, oh, they changed it down. Actually, they didn't change it down. They changed it up and then they brought it down, right? Again.
Oh,
So
interesting.
this is an example of now I don't know exactly if this was necessarily related specific COVID, or if this was related to I think backlogs, or I think this was more related to backlogs in IRCC, that it was taking so long that they wanted more time. So, but the important thing of that piece of information of the timelines is if you're a company, you want to apply as soon as you can for a work permit, because if it goes bad on you, you have time to redo it again. You have time to submit it again. Okay. So that's one of my tidbits of advice that you want to take with a shorter timeline. Um, so yes, LMI 6 months. Does it really impact people listening? Not It's not really. It impacts like if you're trying to find LMI, like you find a company to support you with LMI that may already have an LMI. That it's now they only have 6 months to fill the spot, not 12. So that's one of the big changes. Another thing as well is work permit processing times. So one thing is when you have a work permit that's about to expire. So let's say you're about to expire, you submitted an LMI now. You're waiting. Now that work permit's expired and you have filed an extension. So now you're an extension, now you're maintained status. So you can still legally work, right? But when you submit that, you're going to say, hey, I submit it, but I'm waiting for an LMI to be approved, right? Now, when you do that, you could communicate that and you could show proof of that. And you're hoping that IRCC is like, okay, we're going to give you some time till the LMI comes in, okay? And then the LMI comes in, there you go, you got your work permit, no work stoppage, right? But what's happened is that is I and this isn't we've seen it happen before that it just comes out of processing time. Like if you don't have an LMI in time, they just refuse it,
Yeah.
right? So for me personally, I never really looked at just because you asked for more time, you're gonna get it. So for me, I always looked at processing times for work permits, and that was the most important consideration, right? And try to do as fast as you can. So, but that's one of the factors that's come in is basically now they're saying is we're not going to consider, we'll give you 2 months of time, which is pretty much processing time as it is now. And if not, then, we're not going to hold it back. And again, this
Mm.
may look for efficiencies, but that could be quite harmful because people are going to be experiencing periods of non-work, right? So, but if they have fast work permit processing, that could be good because let's see, even if you have to stop working. Okay.
Yeah.
LMI comes in. LMI comes in, then you apply for new work permit. But hey, if it takes a few weeks to get a work permit, okay, at least you're not waiting 3-4 months, right?
Mm. Mm.
So that's one of the considerations for people who are for folks who are visa exempt, meaning they're from countries you don't need a visa to enter. You may want to consider leaving Canada and coming back in, right, with an LMI, right? Again, don't you want to take legal advice in everything I'm saying here? This is all very broad,
Yeah.
but you may want to do that because then you could get a work permit right at the border, right? As long as the
Yeah.
merit's good, the strength's good, if the person didn't overstay or do something silly, like there's a lot of considerations you want to have.
Yeah. And great point in the legal advice part because I really like that. Like, because with all you're saying to me here, I'm like, gosh, like this thing is a huge basket of laws and policies that one has to get through.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big spider web. It's a big spider web.
Yeah, that's a
It's
good analogy for what immigration
yeah.
feels like. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Ish.
And the longer you've been in Canada and like especially if you weren't careful with it, you the spider webs are there's bigger spiders on that web that you really got to pay attention to, right? If you worked with a good immigration representative or you really on the ball yourself and you did everything correctly, okay, not bad, right? Like you can imagine. But if you overstayed here or did a flagpole here or did something, or did something here or misrep, it could get messy very quickly.
Yeah. So, before I want to just kind of ask, like, if like tips on how people can take advantage of all these things, and I also want to also talk about Improved and how Improved can help with this. But I remember you mentioned something about some big changes in PGWP, and I want to just kind of go back to that and say, like, if off the top of your head, like, what are the biggest changes happening with the postgraduate work permit? Like, what are those changes? Because I know you mentioned it, and we just kind of moved on to what we're talking about. Like,
Right. So a couple of things with the PGWP. So the first thing and the biggest impact I think is the spouse PGWP. So before, when you had a postgraduate work permit, you could bring your spouse with you. Now you could only do that for certain types of for like masters and certain programs that now you could bring your spouse under that. So that's a pretty sizable difference. Because keep in mind, when you bring your spouse, they could also be working. They could also be getting Canadian work experience. They could also be contributing towards your PR journey as well, right? So that's one of the big considerations. Another thing as well is that the schools, um, like I said, there is there is a level of I'm going to take a quick step back, and there is a level of deception or level of, I wouldn't necessarily call it deception, but there is a level of um, there's so many players in immigration at so many levels, and there's so many folks interested in their own personal interests or their own gains, that there's a lot of neither disconnection or there's a lot of deception. I don't know. Sometimes it's deception, sometimes it's disconnect. I'm not going to point fingers on which one it is. So the reason I want to kind of go there is because this leads up to one of the points I'm going to lead to, which is in the study world, is you have all the agents and folks overseas who are trying to make money off the school recommendations, get you into school, not even know if it's the right path for you, don't care. They just put you into a business program that you're never, you're probably not going to use. You're probably 80% of your class is international students. Like it became a thing. It became this thing that there's a lot of money involved, and people were from the public schools that the government's funding there to to the agents, just everyone's involved. So what happened was there were schools that were created, that worked with a school, public school. They opened up a branch, and then they brought in a ton of international students into those programs. And then, by virtue of that relationship, you could get a post-grad work permit, right? So that's how that worked. What the government's like, no, we're not going to do that now. And the government's looking like a bunch of like the heroes are doing something finally. But keep in mind that, in my opinion, and I don't see how not, they knew that these things were happening. Like they were familiar with it, and that's where we are. But nonetheless, they are making great changes, and a lot of people in the immigration industry, especially the leaders in the space, are happy with it because, again, it was unhealthy. It wasn't a
yeah,
good way to behave, and it wasn't the value of the intentions of the programs were being honored, right? So, but that changed. Going back to your question, so folks under that, they would no longer qualify, right? So you got to be really careful. Go onto the government site, or even if you use, we'll talk about Improved, but when you fill out the question, make sure the school, and you check if a postgrad work permit is included. And sometimes it is, but there's conditions. So just please take a look and check that out. And make sure that any school you're looking to go into, you do that. And don't let anyone, they'll say, oh, you could get a work permit, which you could work part time during school. And sometimes that's how they
yeah,
phrase it, right? But
yeah,
the real work permit you need is the postgraduate work permit when you
yeah.
graduate, right? So that's where you got to pay attention to.
Mm.
This is
Because I
only a
feel like
fraction, my friend.
I feel like every single of this call is going to be, when I'm done with it, I'll just go sit down and think a bit, and I'll call someone and be like, hey, I just finished talking to Blayne. I think you shouldn't do this, because you're saying things, I'm hearing things people have said to me, like, oh, I'm thinking of doing this, I'm thinking of doing that. I mean, I had someone who flew into Canada because someone told him that, just come in, we'll get you a job. just come with your visitor's visa, we'll get you a job. And that's probably a story for another day. But like that person has no job now. They're looking for you to get out of the country because basically their visa has expired and it's just a ton. It's just a problem. Like they're in trouble. Like they're in
Yeah.
serious trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and I guess would be a segue to why we're doing what we're doing, what we're building, but it's heartbreaking, the stories, it's heartbreaking, and it's just, yeah, I don't have words to explain the intensity that I feel about it, and just because of the sheer number of folks we speak to, the people who call us, share their stories, speaking, seeing it for 14 years and doing it at a volume where you see enough. And I talk to our team. We have morning team meetings every day with the team. We know the ins and outs of every file. What's going on? What's the problem here? Why are we getting this government request? So we see it, and especially myself, I see it, and it's heartbreaking because it's like it's so disconnected, and it's just a lot of misinformation, and it's a lot of bent information, right? You could still sound like you're saying the honest thing, but it's really not, because you're not saying the extra sentence that someone should know about to make a educated decision, right? So that's what we're seeing, and it's not just Canada; it's immigration everywhere, and that's it. And I really do recommend for people to just try to seek someone that you could trust, get honest advice from someone who's more interested in helping you, not trying to make money. And of course, money plays a role. We're not charities, like, please understand that. But the intention of what they're speaking to you about matters. And go from there, and navigate that and get as much information as you can, and make educated decisions. But one thing I will tell you is, again, there's a lot of people getting permanent residencies, a lot of people going through it, and it's working out. And folks who, hey, start from a visa, come to Canada, see what's going on first, you apply for a study permit, or maybe you come across someone who wants to hire you, or whatever else. Doors open up and the world opens up. So please, it does take some chance and does take some risk for you to do that. But just understand that there is a lot of folks involved, and it seems like a scary place. Um, but just take it one step at a time. Just educate yourself as much as you can, and go from there.
Yeah. This feels like a good place to just kind of follow up with the question I talked about earlier, which is basically, I feel like you shared some of it, was like, so someone who's, with all these changes coming on, like tips how to take advantage. I mean, I hate the word take advantage, but maybe that's what it is. How to take
Yeah.
advantage, how to be prepped for this,
Hmm.
and how does Improved help? Because I mean, I think Improved does help solve some of these problems that we see
Yeah.
people just get
Yeah.
into. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to give everyone a little background, I want to quickly introduce myself before, but, I do operate Bright Immigration, a Toronto-based immigration consultancy, and we've been around for, over 10 years of helping people with immigration, and we've helped tens of thousands of people. I've done thousands of consultations. So we've taken that experience and all of what we've done, and we've applied that towards a platform called Improved, which is the shirt I'm wearing. It's spelled with two M's, by the way, so Improved with two M's. And basically, what it is a simple platform. You fill out a questionnaire, you immediately know your immigration options, what it takes for you to get your points, what pathways are available to you. We're also coming out with very soon with the status manager, so you can manage your statuses for all those students here. So it's really made to kind of help support and guide you. Again, it is not an immigration expert. It's not there. It's not made to take you from 0 to 100. It's made to take you from 0 to 70, maybe around 70, 60, 70, maybe 80. And that's, we're talking about today, and soon it'll get better and better, but that's where we are. But then you take that and then you consult with experts, and you have far more knowledge, right? So that's what Improve does. And it's a passion project of ours. Like I said, it's a big thing we're working on. This is a really big passion project for myself, from even our story of how we came to Canada. Just to give you folks a little background on that story, I think it's important for you to understand where we're operating from. But I was born in Canada myself. My parents immigrated. My mom's from Trinidad and Tobago, which is in the Caribbean, and my dad is from Fiji, which is Polynesian Islands near Australia. And basically, to give you a little background, at the end of slavery, these sugarcane the countries producing a lot of sugarcane, like again Trinidad, Guyana, Fiji, certain parts of Africa, etc. They were essentially slavery was abolished and they needed labor, so they went to India. Sorry, they were already in India. They basically convinced our ancestors, many of them were illiterate, to say, "Hey, come to these places, work. We'll give you a job. We'll pay you well. After 5 years, or after the work term, you could go back home. Some cases, you may even get land." All of these things were promised. And then essentially what happened is when they actually did come, they were enslaved, right? So my grandfather has stories of him living in barracks, which is where slaves lived, and then they was abolished, and then Indians essentially lived there. And long story short, what I realized this last year. I realized that I'm here to help honor my ancestors and ensure we finally stop that. And by what I mean stop that, I mean like by providing an honest pathway for people to be informed to make those decisions, right? So they could say like, "Oh wow, for me to get this many points, I got to do all these things." Okay, all right, that's what we have to do. And please, I don't want this to scare you. I don't want, I want this to see, but I want you to be more informed of how serious you need to start it. Some of the best advice I tell people is to consult before Improved was built. Speak to an immigration representative, legal rep, an expert. Every 6 months, even while you're in school, even right? See if anything's changing. When you graduate, talk to them every 6 months because you may be working a job, all of a sudden a knock code change happens and that job is no longer skilled. There's so many things happening. So the best advice I could give is to stay on top of it, and Improve was built to help you do that. And then of course you could connect with experts. They could advise you and they already know your profile because you've answered the questions and guide you through there. So
Yeah.
that's what Improve's there to do.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I mean, we're rounding up right now, so just one last question, and then we're gonna call this a wrap. Is, is there like anything you think is coming down the line in the next couple of months based off chatter, rumors? I hate maybe rumors is not the right word, but I mean I know like sometimes when the government is planning stuff, you start to hear like some of the government voices start to talk a bit about those things. Is there like any big one that maybe one big thing people could watch out for that might change in coming months? Might like
Um, Yeah, like, I've recently saw some content, some articles from some folks, and just again, chatter is, they may be looking to implement programs to help students, international students more. So that's great. They did the CEC draws. So I think that they're going to start trying to sort some of those things out and make that a little bit more clear lined. So that's where I see some things. We're starting to see some, I've heard of some folks having experienced a little bit more refusals with work permits, for example, in some cases. So you may have to fight that a little bit more. So all in all, there is definitely always going to be changes. I guess the biggest trend I would go with is if you are a student here working, trying to figure things out, my my best advice to you is stay employed, get a skilled job, do as best as you can in that area. Keep your eyes up for immigration changes, and before you pick up and leave to move somewhere, really understand what it is you're doing, if it's truly on the right trend or not. Again, where are you in that system? So that's kind of the things we're hearing right now. And my personal gut and intuition is I do think that some point soon I will hope to see some business immigration programs. Business programs, it's been, I feel, and I think a lot of folks feel like it's not cutting it. And there's a lot of opportunity for business investment and create more jobs and things like that. So I would hope to see that. But yes, I hope I answered that question in terms of
yeah,
what I
yeah, yeah.
see down the line.
Yeah, I think that's it because again, it's a gut call. It's a bet. It's what you're seeing out there. And like you said earlier in the conversation, things change so fast. Like, so it's just like
Yeah.
it's just kind
Yeah.
of staying and seeing what's changing. Man, Blayne, thank you so much. This has been a good first conversation about this. I'm actually looking forward to the next one because I'm like, okay, what am I going to learn the next time we do this?
Yeah, we'll definitely have lots of touch base on for sure, and there's always stuff going on. So yeah, it's fun times. Next time we'll talk maybe about processing times and how that's been changing.
Yeah. Like, gosh, like what? I mean, I think for me, the biggest take about this is that, I mean, for someone like me, I'm currently applying for my citizenship. Like, it's like this thing you can't, like, I mean, I came in as a PR, so maybe mine's a bit faster. I got in 3 years I'm applying, but like, gosh, it just feels like you can't sleep on this. Like you can't sleep on this immigration thing. You can't at all.
Yeah, if that's your objective and like you want to become Canadian or you want to achieve that, you can't sleep. No, not at all. And because it's again, it's something, and it's something money can't buy, right?
Yep.
It's something that if you make some mistakes here or there, and really, I've seen people throw everything and just can't get it done, right? So it's not very common with us, but I've heard stories and I've seen folks where that's happened. So yeah, just take it seriously and one step at a time. But yes, there's a lot to cover, and this is just Canada. We have, there's a whole other world of immigration out there too. So
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. This has been a good one. Thank you.